So we've talked about car collecting, we've talked about the AI races, but just why does Gran Turismo 7 feel so unrewarding to play through? Well, other than the aforementioned reasons. I think a lot of it comes down to the structure of the game, how it's been designed. But how could a game that throws cars at you near constantly, and where earning money honestly isn't that difficult, manage to feel like a grind? To me, like most things, it's all about balance. And this is where game design is so important. But with GT7, it feels like Polyphony just took all of their collective knowledge accumulated over the past quarter of a century on game design and just threw it in the toilet. And then launched that toilet into the fucking sun. It's no joke to say that when it comes to some of the design decisions made in GT7, it's baffling to think that a team which has showed their incredible talent on so many occasions could possibly come up with any of this. From decisions which give the players the option to not even engage with the gameplay itself, to reward systems which actively make players feel like they're being insulted and made fun of, GT7 truly has everything. Even where the game succeeds, it still manages to make illogical choices with how certain things are handled. It's almost as if nobody considered how any of these choices would impact the player experience, or even what people come to a Gran Turismo game for. We're also going to talk about how GT7 tries to mirror reality in some areas, but in others completely contradicts itself in incredible ways. In this respect, GT7 is a game which achieves in removing, or at least reducing, a lot of the things that made the older games so much fun to play through, and almost every new addition being something which could have been done so much better, or in some cases being put in to deliberately make the game less enjoyable, all with the hope of stretching out the experience so players stick around for longer. I wonder how that's working out. But of course, that may not be the only reason for doing all of this. That's right, we're finally going to talk about that elephant in the room. All in good time, but for now, just remember that with Gran Turismo 7, nothing is quite as simple as it seems. It's always difficult to talk about the shortcomings of GT7 without mentioning the successes of the previous games. For me, Gran Turismo 3 is the gold standard when it comes to intelligent racing game design. Whilst not being a completely radical shake-up to the formula from the first two games, there were plenty of subtle tweaks that made it so compelling to play through. The races in GT3 are sorted into 5 leagues: Beginner, Amateur, Professional, Endurance, and Rally. One thing I'd love to highlight specifically is how many events often appear in multiple leagues. So the drivetrain events, FF Challenge, FR Challenge, etc., feature in each of the beginner, amateur, and professional leagues. And as you'd expect, going up the leagues they get gradually tougher, with more challenging opponents driving faster cars. And not only that, but the races of course get longer and introduce elements like tyre wear, meaning pit stops may be needed in some of the later races. I love this because as you play through the events, you have so many options with how you go up the ladder. Do you stick with the car you used in the beginner league and just upgrade it to keep up with the competition? Or maybe save up for a higher performance car which you really want, or even use a car which you'd want as a prize car that's eligible for the event. Combine this with the sheer amount of variety of these events, and it means that basically any car you have in any state of tune will be competitive in at least one event, but usually more. The only difficulty with GT3 is that since the opponent car performance isn't listed anywhere, it can be a bit of trial and error to find an event that your specific car fits into. Either way, I think elements like this are where game design really shines in racing games. More often than not though, I feel like this sort of thing is completely disregarded, with the mainstream only concerned with how the game looks and how it feels to drive. Check out this review of GT7 from IGN. Hardly anywhere does it even mention the single-player structure, and when it does, right near the start where it outlines what the menu books are, the author doesn't seem to think it's much of a difference from previous GT games, stating, "The racing events the Gran Turismo Cafe deliberately threads us through all make up part of the large list of career races we'd be otherwise doing anyhow." I guess he's the type of guy who doesn't want to think for himself because Daddy Luca will take care of it for him. This statement alone is odd in quite a few ways, but we'll get onto that soon. By the way, I'd recommend checking out my video on car collecting on GT7 if you haven't seen it already, because it will provide a lot of context to this video. Oh well, this is IGN, what can you expect? That said, he does at least highlight the ridiculous rolling starts, which we talked about last time. Man, you've got to know that you fucked up if even IGN is roasting you about it. A great example I find of game design not really being valued when it comes to racing games is with Dirt Rally 2.0. Let me just say that I adore Dirt Rally 2.0. I put hundreds of hours into it, and when it comes to an authentic rally experience, there isn't much that even comes close, at least on console. The tarmac physics can be a little wonky sometimes, but it's still fun. Although, as a game, I feel like it could have been easily made better. The single player is extremely bare bones, with a single championship available for both Rally and Rallycross, and there's no restriction as to which car you can use. If you win, you get promoted up a league, which just means the championship gets longer, and if you win the final championship, you just stay in the same league and nothing happens. You might say that it's a rally sim, so the single player doesn't matter. Thing is though, the previous game in the series, Dirt 4, had a fully fleshed out career with various championships for different cars and rallies, as well as a team management aspect where you could hire employees, deal with sponsors, and even design your own livery. The most frustrating part is that Dirt Rally 2.0 keeps some of the team management stuff in the most basic way, to the point where you've got to wonder why they even bothered, to be honest. Even if they didn't want to design a full single player again, they could have just copied over the stuff from Dirt 4, and that would have helped massively. It seems though, because they market the game as a sim, they just get away with not bothering at all in this area. Forza Horizon 5 is another that doesn't seem much worth in having a structured single player. Pretty much every event that you do as part of the main story allows you to use any car you want, and the AI opponents just match what you use. It makes everything feel kind of aimless. Structure matters. Of course, you don't want a game like this to be completely linear, but a little bit of restriction goes a long way in terms of players feeling like their choices actually matter. So let's see what GT7 does in this regard, viewing it from the start of the game. No, not the music rally. I've done this joke before, haven't I? So we've talked about the menu books and how all of that works, but I need to apologise to anyone who watched the car collecting video. You see, I've lied to you all. With the menu books, you do actually have a meaningful choice. The choices are A, do the designated races and win the cars through them, or B, just buy the cars because they always put the ones you need in the used car dealers. Wow, game design! That's right, in this racing game, they give the option to progress without doing any of the races. In theory, if you get lucky with a couple of cars in the Legends dealer, you could complete this game by doing only the championships and no other races in the single player. The only issue would be money. Good thing that after only a few races, you'd be drowning in it. At the point in the game where the menu books would insist on you driving front-wheel drive hatchbacks, you can have enough money to almost buy a supercar. Needless to say, the balance is a little bit off. GT3 had a reputation for being tough for beginners, as breaking out of the early game was quite a challenge. If you were smart about it though, you could do it without being that fast. It was all about investment. So saying, okay, I can do this event with this car, now I have this prize car, can I use it in any other event? Or I could sell it and upgrade my other car with the money and use it for this. And that was all part of the fun. Not that any of this matters now anyway. You see, from update 1.11 back in April last year, a slew of supposed fixes were implemented to the in-game economy. There's a lot to dissect here, and we will, but the one that has the most game-breaking implications is the massive boost to circuit experience payouts. If you're good enough, you can earn millions of credits from just a few minutes of driving. The thing is, you can do these at any point in the game, the only restriction being how quickly you can unlock the tracks by doing the menu books. This means it is possible to earn multiple millions of credits within the first few minutes of starting a brand new game. Of course, not everyone may be able to do this, but even if you can achieve bronze, the payout is insane compared to what you'd normally be earning at this point in the game. When I say that these fixes are just a band-aid over a massive gaping wound, this is what I mean. In fact, this is more like going to the doctors for treatment, they stitch up your wound, and then they pull out a knife and stab you somewhere else. They really didn't consider the implications to progression when they rushed out this fix. Another element we have in GT7 is the good old license tests, back once again. I've got to say, I think they did a pretty good job of them in here. In terms of the tests themselves, the variety and amount of tests feels good, and it's fun to progress and do more of them. For more experienced players, they're not too hard to gold, with the exception of the final test, S10, which is an absolute standout. I wish they applied this much creativity to the rest of the game. And in terms of prizes for completing them, you can earn an interesting and varied selection of cars as well. But like everything in this game, there's a catch. This being that they're pretty much pointless. Only the National B and National A licenses are required in the game, so the IB, IA and S licenses do nothing. Meaning that, as they don't actually grant you access to anything, they are by definition not licenses. How do you f*** that up? Incredible. Anyway, we've talked before at length about how the menu books force you down this narrow path when it comes to car collecting, making sure you have basically every car you need to progress at almost all times, and dissuading you from buying the cars you want to and making your own decisions, whilst also making the cars you do collect almost instantly redundant. And it seems to me, because this is a racing game, that this sort of terrible design gets a free pass in some people's minds. But could you imagine if other games tried to do this? Take a role-playing game, for example. So, say maybe you get a quest from a wise sage to collect some rare artifact. Go to X place and collect this artifact, then bring it back to me. So you go to the place, you defeat some enemies in that area, collect the artifact and bring it back. And say this artifact is a weapon or some armor or something you can use in the game. So you bring it back to the sage, they then proceed to lecture you about why this artifact is so important and unique, and why you should value it so much, and after that they return the artifact to you. He then gives you your next quest, which is to do the exact same thing, but for another artifact. Really? Again? Well, at least I can use my new armor or weapon on this quest. Right? And the whole game is just that repeated like 20 times. If that actually was a real game, it would be mocked incessantly. In fact, if someone even tried to pitch that as a game idea, they would be laughed out of the room. But because Gran Turismo is a racing game, in the minds of some people, including professional game reviewers, it's fine. Because as we know, only the gameplay and visuals seem to matter. Car goes vroom, that's all you need. I think another way in which this manifests itself is within the races that are tied to the menu books. Like I said, given GT7's genius design, you can ignore these races almost entirely, but if you decide to do them, you will start to notice something. Aside from the AI and how the race itself is structured, which I talked about in the last video, check it out if you want a full breakdown of that nightmare, the selection of event types is what I mean here. Some people got the wrong impression in my first video where I talked about the impact of the drivetrain events, so FF Challenge, FR Challenge, etc., implying that they didn't exist in GT7. Clearly, if you played the game, you know that they do. The difference is in what form they exist. For example, take the FF Challenge in GT3. There are 3 of them in 3 different leagues, getting harder and with faster opponents each time. The car choice is open, so you can use any FF car. In GT7, the only FF Challenge events are the 450pp Japanese FF Challenge. Why so specific? That's because, as I mentioned before, the events in the game serve only the cars from the menu books. In this case, the Japanese FF Sports Cars menu. If this menu didn't exist, then this event would have no reason to exist either, and most likely wouldn't be in the game. And this is why so many of the events from past GT games were and are still missing. Another excellent example of this is the Camaro menu. They needed to create an event for this menu, so what do? They could have used a past GT event like Stars and Stripes, or even just make it a Chevrolet one make race. No. Instead, what they made was the American Sunday Cup 600pp. Sunday Cup 600pp. Sunday Cup 600pp. The Sunday Cup is the first event in the game strictly for beginners. Why is there a 600 performance point version of it halfway through the game? That doesn't make any sense. It's just not the Sunday Cup anymore. The name is meaningless. Oh yeah, let me just get in my SRT Viper and do the Sunday Cup. And this happens a lot when you consider all of the events. For the 4-wheel drive challenge, the only form of that is the Japanese 4-wheel drive challenge 600pp events, because that only exists for the Japanese rally base cars menu. That also explains why there's no MR challenge, because they never created a menu that would need it to exist. This is why there is such a lack of events and event variety in this game, despite what certain game journalists may tell you. This isn't true now, and was even less true back in March 2022. And not only is there a lack of events catering for different cars, but also for the different tracks. I never thought I'd see the day where I unlock a track in Gran Turismo and there are no races for it. How does this even happen? It says a lot that even now, many tracks in the game have barely any races. Take St. Croix as an example. This is an original circuit that has 6 different variations. When the game launched, there were only 2 races. And both of them were the exact same variation. Why? Did they do this on purpose? What is wrong with them? Since then, they've blessed us with a 3rd race, and at a different variation this time, imagine that. But even still, the variance is severely lacking. So, beyond regular events, we also have championships returning after their hiatus in GT Sports. We have 10 championships at present, not a huge amount, but as long as each of them are great and a real challenge to beat, then that doesn't really matter. 4 of them only have 2 races. 2 races. In past games, almost all events had at least 3 races, and they're trying to pass off 2 races as a championship? And both races are at the same track. They're not particularly creative either, because the final few are just generic events for 600, 700 and 800 pp cars respectively. And they added plenty of standalone races for those events as well, so they're not even unique to the championship. Oh, and they removed the ability to choose an individual race from a championship to do, without having to race through the whole championship. Don't you just love it when developers remove features that were in older games for absolutely no reason? Now, it's not as if the races even get significantly different as you progress in the game. For example, the final championship is about 5 races, which each take around 10 to 15 minutes to complete, so it's not that long, but the main problem is the format. Like basically every other career race, it's one of those where you start at the back of the grid, miles behind, and you just have to catch up to the other cars. I always find it so ironic how in the previous games, where you had only 5 opponents, and they all started right next to you, you had the option to qualify. But now with 20 cars on the track, where qualifying would actually make a difference and be a nice parallel with, say, sport mode, they don't. One of the talking heads even mentions a qualifying session in one of the races. I guess we just weren't invited then. Further devolving the experience is that these races don't even have tyre wear and fuel usage, so they try to hype it up as the final championship, the pinnacle of racing in GT7, but the experience is pretty much the same as the Sunday Cup, but just with faster cars and slightly longer races. Maybe they should call this the 800pp Sunday Cup. Changeable weather is something that can impact these races, but through the career as a whole, it's very rarely even a possibility. There is a difference between simplifying a game to make it more accessible and just not using any of the key features. GT7 does the latter, and as such the sense of progression is severely skewed, since by the end of the game, nothing has really changed, even if the game wants to convince you that it has and that you've achieved so much. One benefit of all of this is that playing through the game again to get the footage, it was far less time consuming considering I didn't even have to do half of the races. In the final cutscene at the cafe, after winning the last championship, Sarah mentions that it feels like we only just met yesterday, but the reality is that it's not even been 9 hours since I started. That sums it up better than I ever could. But the saddest part about all of this is of course those we've lost along the way. Those which have provided us with countless hours of joy over the years, and memories we will never forget. Maybe we will see some of them again, but there's a good chance that we never will. So please, take a moment with me now to reflect on and remember the Gran Turismo events we so dearly miss.